Can you summarize what has happened at this point, what you think is taking place, and what will happen?
Well, Trump and the extremist Republicans, who constitute a minority of the population and have a minority of the votes, are trying to consolidate their minority rule. They're aided in that by the U.S. Constitution and the structure of the U.S. system, which is against, fundamentally, in a certain sense, has many barriers to majority rule. It's fundamentally anti-democratic. Things wouldn't even be close now if you just based the presidency, like most countries do, on who gets the most votes. Biden is way ahead in the popular vote, and both parties expected that from the very beginning. They have a whole series of things they're trying to leverage. Starting from the deep level, they're in the midst of trying to sabotage the census to exclude as many non-whites as they can, and therefore make it easier for the Republican state legislatures to further gerrymander and give their minority of supporters even more dominant representation in the U.S. Congress. And in fact, the election results so far indicate that the Democratic establishment, led by Schumer and Pelosi and others, and the campaign committee, did not turn out enough Democrats to take control of enough state legislatures to turn the tide of this gerrymandering and redistricting. So the structure of system, even after this relatively high turnout election, is likely to get even worse. On COVID, where Trump has committed, in essence, criminally negligent homicide and has a stack of approaching a 250,000 bodies, 250,000 victims, he's cynically leveraging that to attempted political advantage. He told his followers, don't worry about COVID, go to the polling place, vote, it's not going to hurt you. And he observed that the Democrats told their followers, no, COVID can kill you. They simply stated the medical fact. Trump saw this and said, great, the Democrats are going to vote by mail. I'll just sabotage the post office. And he did. There are undoubtedly significant numbers of votes which Democrats mailed, which will not arrive in time. Then, as a second step, Trump is now saying, okay, those mailed-in votes that did arrive invalidate the bill.
I ate your fish.
Then the Republican lawyers will go to the courts,
hoping
to eventually reach a tame federal judge that they have, or reach the now tame U.S. Supreme Court, and get them to say, yeah, these votes should be invalidated. And if that doesn't work, they're ready, as Lindsey Graham alluded to try to call on some Republican state legislatures to simply ignore the popular vote in their states and send pro-Trump electors, even if Trump lost the popular vote in their state. Then, on the street level, aside from this indoor game of politics, which they're playing very ruthlessly, they have their armed tough guys who Trump has been cultivating from the start. The militias, the civilians who carry guns, the racist police unions who Trump appeals to. And they first called on them to show up at the polling places. And by the way, another aspect of the structural rigging was that over the years, Republican legislatures and governors had been systematically reducing the number of polling places for voting in areas that tend to vote against Trump, what courts have called surgical race-based targeting. But they were calling in the election for their armed tough guys to show up at the polling places that did remain in enemy territory to try to intimidate people away from the polls. Now, as the vote counting is in process, people like Don Jr. and Bannon and Gorka and Trump himself, though not yet as explicitly as them, are essentially raising a prospect of staging physical assaults on vote counting facilities because, as President Trump put it, any vote that is part of a tally that is not coming out in his favor should not be considered a legal vote. However, I think from having seen over many years and worked against U.S. operations overseas, operations led by American Special Forces and the CIA, where they systematically try to disrupt or thwart elections and sometimes back coups. The most recent big one being in Bolivia in 2019. That you have to be very you have to get the timing right in the use of your street forces. And I think on election night, in the crucial hours after late election night, when Trump went into his tent and started sulking like a bully who had been thwarted, I think he may have missed his moment, because that was the key moment to call his people onto the streets and start stopping and trashing the votes, and he failed to do that. They're now playing catch-up. At this moment, the political atmosphere, I think, is not quite sufficiently favorable to them to give them a favorable chance of getting the vote count stopped that they want stopped. A lot of this turns on political atmosphere, especially in the courts. For example, the only reason that Obamacare still exists now, even in its weakened form, is that when it came to the Supreme Court several years ago, Justice Roberts decided to reject the Republican attempt to repeal Obamacare because he feared the public reaction. He feared the public backlash. Now, even the most militant, radical rightist Republican judges, they have their ears up. They have their fingers to the wind. They're looking at the mood on the streets and in the country, and they're looking at what they can get away with. They will do with whatever they think they can get away with, but if they think they can't get away with something, they won't do it. This leads to the issue of the Senate. The Senate, if Biden becomes president and somehow manages to actually take the White House because he had the majority of the electoral votes, the Senate control becomes absolutely crucial. If the Democrats fail to control the Senate, McConnell will try to act as, in essence, co-president, and the radical rightist Supreme Court, now with a 6-3 majority with Barrett, will feel emboldened, licensed to do anything, because they won't be facing the constraint of possible legislation, which you could have with a Democratic Senate, that might expand the number of justices or might implement term limits for justices, as Representative Ro Khanna and others have proposed. And they won't be facing the prospect of any new Biden replacement judges in case someone leaves, who might be oppositional, or McConnell could even decide to block Biden from putting in any federal judges whatsoever. So this could let the Republican Supreme Court completely off the leash, and they could go about invalidating basic tenets of civil rights, voting rights, democracy that still exists in the United States. So we're at a point of epic struggle right now, and of great plasticity. Things could move radically in one direction or radically in the other direction. And I think people have to be very alert and also very self-disciplined, because one of the tools they already used over the summer in the racial justice demonstrations and the demonstrations against police brutality is deliberate provocation by the extreme right to try to create scenes of looting and senseless violence that can then be used as an argument for even stricter authoritarianism and racism and nullification of democracy, and we can't allow that to happen.
Alan, I just want to ask you briefly. You were talking about the issue of the popular vote and the structural inequities built into the system. The actual margin for Joe Biden is likely to be much greater in the popular vote than it is right now, because most people are focusing on Arizona, obviously, and Pennsylvania and